Good evening, good morning. Welcome to week 3 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence Program. I just want to again start off with some announcements. So week 5, upcoming dates. Week 5, we're going to have an office call, and this is mainly related to paper 2. So I'm looking at having it Thursday, so it'd be 2 weeks from this Thursday, looking at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I don't know when that. I just want to get actually a quick survey if that's good for people, because I know we've got people in different time zones, some on the other side of the world, and I want to have an open, again, optional office call to ask about paper 2, to bring up any issues you might have, and we can do that over the Zoom conferencing time. So I want to make sure we get that squared away. So I'm looking at, again, 2 weeks from Thursday, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Please let me know if that's good with you or not when you reply to this announcement. Week 7, I'll probably have a job talk. Again, same thing, Thursday at 9. And we'll do jobs. We'll talk about the paper and the final. I'll try and answer questions on that. And the one thing I'll ask is, if you're interested in jobs, and I know a lot of people are, please send me the questions ahead of time so I can get you an answer at the actual job talk itself. So paper 1, the collection strategy should be due, depending on when you're saying this or when you're watching this, Sunday night, 11:59 p.m. So please, and that's Sunday the 17th at 11:59 p.m. So, yeah, I don't think I've gotten any requests for extensions, and I'm not going to look too kindly if you give me your request tomorrow night at 11:50 p.m. And then VoiceThread, I saw the VoiceThreads for this week. I probably should have capped it at 5 minutes. So go ahead and cap the VoiceThreads at 5 minutes. I want you to be concise. I don't want to cut people off from information, but I want you to be as concise as possible when talking the VoiceThread issue, so your classmates can fully grasp what you're looking at and can interact properly. So VoiceThread, 5 minutes tops. And then the current events. I mentioned this, I think, on everyone's current events. Depth, not summary. I don't want just a summary of the article. I want you to go down a level or two, bring your own analysis, what the key points are, and what are the impacts on whether intelligence or U.S. foreign policy or even business activity. And a lot of you did the Equifax issue. I'm going to do this right now based on a couple of comments students had. Just do one. So I say do 3 things on current events. Just go ahead and just do one. So if you want to do business issue, if you want to do a criminal issue, or you want to do a homeland security, counterterrorism, strategic issue, just only worry about one, so you can give that depth in the current event. So obviously it's too late to do that this week, but starting for the next 5 weeks, go ahead and do just focus on one and provide a little bit more depth. So speaking of which, I'll do this myself. So North Korea, and I want to talk about North Korea. I also want you to give an example of what I mean by depth and going beyond just the summary. And I think everyone did, at least for week 1, your current events on North Korea. So I think it's a worthwhile topic. For those of you who don't know, and I think everyone should be aware, last week, or 2 weeks ago now, Kim Jong-un detonated a thermonuclear device. And in the past 2 days, he launched a second missile over Japan into the Pacific Ocean, overflying Japan itself. And in a few weeks before that, he launched what the intelligence community thinks is an ICBM capable of hitting the United States. So when Kim Jong-un took power 5 years ago, everyone laughed at him. Everyone said he was just too young for the job. He was hanging out with Dennis Rodman, and it was such a bone of humor back then in 2011. And now nobody's really laughing. And that might be one of the purposes for doing this. So that's the current events. What I want you to do is, again, for your current events, is to go in depth And what I mean by that is what I'm going to do right now. So based on this, there's some key questions or key points to look at in depth. One, will North Korea ever give up its nuclear weapons? And that should be a question mark. I apologize. That is our negotiating stance. That's what, or I mean, maybe you guys can draw a different conclusion, but the way I interpret our negotiating stance, based on from the president on down, is that a nuclear armed North Korea with an ICBM is unacceptable. And so the question is, will Kim Jong-un give up his nuclear weapons, and will he give up his ICBM program? I am here to tell you that Kim Jong-un will not give up his nuclear weapons. They are too much is invested in him. They're too much. Not only are they a security guarantee for him, but they're also such a point of national pride. And if you look at the videos, whenever they successful test happens, there's almost widespread celebration in North Korea. So he would lose considerable face if he had to negotiate them away. So I'm here to tell you that I don't know if anyone here ever will negotiate with North Korean nuclear or negotiate on that level, but Kim Jong-un will never give up his nuclear weapon. Or give up his nuclear weapons in negotiation. So put that fantasy aside. Is Kim Jong-un rational? There's a lot of talk again that Kim Jong-un is irrational. And again, I don't want to get too political here, but even some senior officials say he's irrational. He's killed his half-brother in Malaysia. He treats his people in horrid. He's very brutal to his own people. He kills his own inner circle. And if he's irrational, that means he can't have nuclear weapons because he'll just launch them against the United States willy-nilly because he's irrational. I don't buy that argument at all. I don't think you can confuse or never confuse rationality with brutality. There are a lot of brutal regimes out there, North Korea being one of them, that are perfectly rational. If you want to hold on to power in your North Korea, you kill your inner circle. You put a lot of your dissenters in camps. That's rational. It's not. You're trying to hold on to power. If he was irrational, and I'll say this, he's essentially had a nuclear weapon for 50 years, in the sense that he could obliterate the city of Seoul, his arch enemy in the south. But he hasn't done that, or no North Korean leader has done that. He's essentially been able to obliterate the city of Tokyo with gas and missiles for the last 15 to 20 years, and he hasn't done it because he knows that if he ever did something like that, we would obliterate his country. So he's rational. He is rational. He is checked by our superior weapon systems, and he knows which lines to cross and which lines to not. That is the definition of being rational. And he knows we can't go after his nuclear program because of he holds Seoul and he holds Tokyo at risk. So he is rational in that sense. And then are these issues, and that feeds into some of these questions, are these issues game changers? The fact that he has an ICBM, the fact that he has a nuclear program, the fact that he has a thermonuclear weapon. I've heard they're game changers. I hear that over and over again. I'm not so sure. He's, as I said earlier, he's had a pseudo-nuclear capability. He's had the ability to obliterate Seoul. He's had the ability to obliterate Tokyo, and he has not done so. So the probability is that if he has nuclear weapons, and we have nuclear weapons, and he knows we'd obliterate him if he ever attacked Guam, or if he ever attacked Hawaii or Alaska, that keeps him in check from being aggressive. And I'd also add that if Kim Jong-un ever said, "Oh, I have nuclear weapons, I'm going to blackmail the United States and saying, get all your forces out of South Korea," the United States will just say no. And is he going to launch a nuclear weapon against Tokyo, launch a nuclear weapon against Los Angeles because we're not withdrawing troops from South Korea? I don't think that calculus really comes into play. I don't think him having, and again, my analysis on the situation is him having these nuclear weapons isn't going to lead him to be more aggressive, because we will just check his aggression. Even if he invaded the South, we will just obliterate his army that tries to come out of come across the 38th parallel. The only way these nukes are game changers is if we ever wanted to invade North Korea, which I don't think any rational U.S. leader wants to do, then the nuclear equation comes into play. But other than that, no, it's not a huge game changer. So that's how I kind of want you to lay out the current events. So you summarize what happened and then bring out issues, questions, analytical points that affect, U.S. foreign policy, affect intelligence community, affect business relationships if you choose to go that way. So that's where I want you to go for current events. So review of last week, requirements. All I'll say is that you had the lecture requirements. You saw the Lowenthal chapter on requirements. I just wanted you, hopefully they're integrated into your collection plan. In fact, your start of your collection plan should be a requirement, and then your collection disciplines, and then whatever analytical issues that come up. So please, that should be part of your collection plan, and think about requirements as we go forward. So intelligence traps. I think the three ones that we two ones that we identified: confirmation bias and mirror imaging. And that's a couple of people other brought up, politicization. Although people use different words for politicization, but it's whether it's politicization or whether it's sycophancy among the intelligence community. That I think comes up as well in intelligence traps. So confirmation bias. Again, it's basically you have a preordained belief, and you use intelligence to fit into that preordained belief and ignore all contrary evidence. We all fall under confirmation bias. The key is not to say, oh, I have no biases, but it's to recognize your own biases and hopefully recognize that when you're using confirmation bias, when you're evaluating evidence. I think the Confessions documentary that I had you watch is exactly what confirmation bias is. All contrary evidence was ignored just because they thought they had the initial suspects, and the DNA was ignored, the alibis were ignored, all those other issues were ignored because they wanted to reinforce evidence that fit into their own narrative. And then mirror imaging was the second one that's brought up, and I think we all do that. A couple of you brought up again, and this comes up with the KJU issue, Kim Jong-un. We apply our Western notions of security and what people want when you don't think of an Eastern version of that maybe Kim Jong-un has these nukes and he has to save face, which is important in Eastern societies, particularly in Korean societies. And I think we're not going into those negotiations. We're putting our own biases into it and not considering his perspective. And you're going to see the case studies we talk about, 9/11, Yom Kippur War. Mirror imaging comes up more and more into it. So those are, I think, the key issues. I brought like 10, 11 of them. Lowenthal brought up a bunch. But I think a lot of them fall under these two main themes, and I think a lot of you identify them in your discussion posts. And then the confessions, again, as I mentioned, it's classic confirmation bias. And before, again, you blame a rogue cop, you also have juries and judges and appellate courts and prosecutors all fell under this confirmation bias. So yes, there was a rogue cop there, and he got what he deserved. He ended up in jail. But again, a lot of other people fell under this psychological trap. And then the one thing, I don't know how many people are Jesuit or Catholic or or anything in this course, and I don't know how much it matters, but Georgetown is a Catholic Jesuit school, and they do want to emphasize that there's a value of justice that's a big important part of Georgetown values, which is why I showed this documentary, because it's a grave injustice that happened, and it was only rectified, I think, only 2 months ago, that these convictions were vacated. So again, it's something to think about, just as from a values perspective, that these guys had their lives railroaded by this issue, and you probably will be in positions where your own biases can railroad people and affect lives in positive or negative ways. So that's one of the reasons why I assigned this, or one of the reasons I signed this documentary. And I'd ask, again, if you didn't see the documentary, please do watch it, because it is if it doesn't tug at your heartstrings, I don't know what will. I'd also add that I can't remember, someone pointed out that on Netflix, a series just came out last week on false confessions, people who are coerced into confessions, and it had about 6 or 7 cases of this happening. And ironically, it did not have this case study, which I think is a classic example, and it didn't have the other case study, the Central Park 5. For those of you who are old enough to remember what happened in Central Park in, I think, 1989, where a couple of people were their confessions were coerced for doing this horrible crime. And just as a added note, these things happen when there's a lot of pressure on prosecutors and police to find the guy, to arrest people. Then you see these biases become exacerbated. So that wraps up week 3. I'll also just say, or week 2, I'm sorry. I'll say just some of these issues, these analytical traps. We're going to visit them over and over again when we talk about the case studies in depth. So previewing week 3, 2 case studies, Pearl Harbor, Yom Kippur. So the theme is strategic surprise, and 2 of the classic ones are Pearl Harbor. Everyone, I think, knows what happened on December 7th, 1941. And then the Yom Kippur War, which was when 2 armies, the Egyptian and Syrian armies, surprised Israel and conducted attacks on Israel's borders in 1973. And the Israelis did not know about it until literally hours before it was going to happen. So that's a classic case study, because, again, you have Israel, with its supposed vaunted intelligence service, did not know that 2 of its known enemies with conventional militaries were about to attack until the day of. So the question is, why? How did that happen? And what were the failures? So again, look at, just like the collection cycle that we talk about, were there failures in collection? Were there failures in analysis? Were there failures when the analysts tried to communicate that message to policymakers? Did the policymakers receive that information, but they had their own biases and their own pressures, and they couldn't act? And then was there just underlying circumstances? The not so doctrinal way to say is that stuff happens. Bad things happen, just bad luck. You can have great intelligence, you can have very good analysts, you can have a very good cycle, but just bad luck happens. And so were there underlying circumstances that caused these intelligence failures? So we're going to look at, again, examine both of those case studies in depth. The Dahl Intelligence and Surprise Attacks, I have 3 chapters on that. I think the Dahl is excellent textbook for this class. We'll use it for the 9/11 case study, and then we'll use it for the Pearl Harbor case study, and then in the future we'll use it for the 9/11 case study as well. And I really, that it's concise and it's detailed on what happened wrong, and it's well written. It's clear. It's not written in very difficult jargon to understand. So again, please read that. Please dissect those chapters that I assign. National Geographic Pearl Harbor documentary. I couldn't find it online, so please watch the DVD. again, the DVD, if you don't have any background on Pearl Harbor, the DVD is good. What I also add is that the first 15 minutes of the DVD is where they talk about the intelligence failure. So you can see the characters that are brought up in the doll, and you can actually see them doing what they're doing in the National Geographic. The Yom Kippur War, the Avi Shalom intelligence estimate, failure of intelligence estimate. Again, great article that explains the Yom Kippur War. In the documentary that explains the Yom Kippur War is Al Jazeera, The Crossing. And it's actually a 3-part documentary. I'm only giving you part 1, and about half of part 1 deals with the actual intelligence failure surrounding the Yom Kippur War. But you also get an idea of the war and what happened during the war. And I think it's actually a pretty good overview if you have no background in this conflict. So with that being said, I look forward again to your discussion posts this week. Look forward to finishing your requirements papers. And if there's questions or issues, please let me know.